What's up, people? Welcome back to another episode of Stars and Garters. I'm Katie Pettit, and I do not have a top 10 for you today. I have a top 8 because as I was making this list, I realized I was really reaching for some of the bottom entries. And then, as I was doing that, I was like, hold up. There's nothing that says I have to make a top 5 or a top 10. It just makes more sense in my brain, so I unrestricted it. So this is just a top 8, which is a random number, but it's the number that I have. And today, I'm going to be giving my list of my top 10 fictional clones. I know this is random, but for some reason, a lot of the fandoms that I'm in just have clones in them, which is a weird trend. So, the definition of clone is kind of broad, but I think most of these characters meet it at least mostly. The criteria for placement is clone angst. Every good clone story about a clone character has some amount of clone angst, whether that's just about oh no, I'm not my own person because I'm literally a clone, or it's something along those lines. There has to be some angst about it, and that's what determined the ranking of these clones. So, with that said, let's dive in to my number 8 pick. Now, this one is at the bottom because the definition of clone is like a little bit loose, but it still counts to me, and he has the clone angst, which is that's the real essential part of this list. At number 8, I have Choso from Jujutsu Kaisen. He's a scientifically made person, basically. He was not born, he was created, which is basically the criteria for clone. He is a mix of human and cursed spirit genetics, and obviously he does have some angst about that. And I mean, he's obviously my personal preference and love for these characters obviously factored into the ranking. And I wanted to include Chesso, partially just because I love him and he's a great character, but his clone angst is also a very central part of his story. Because even though he doesn't have too much angst, as far as I know into this story, he doesn't have too much angst about himself being a, a genetic weird mix and not a normal person, but he has a lot of responsibility because he has a lot of brothers who were also made in this way, and he deems it like his responsibility to kind of look out for them and protect him. So while him being a clone doesn't affect his personal thing, he's not too worried about it. It very much affects his brothers, and that's the big deal with Choso is his character. Is he's a big brother, and that's why I love him. So it's not typical clone angst, but as a clone character, he's actually a pretty interesting take. He's at the bottom of the list because he's not your typical clone angst, but it still needed to be said because Choso is amazing, and he's actually one of the less super angsty characters. He's actually just turned this whole, I'm kind of not, I'm definitely not a normal human, and none of my brothers are, but he's actually pretty wholesome about it. He just loves his brothers, low key. And not low key, actually, he's very dramatic about it, but he loves his brothers, and they're clones, and he's like, whatever, I am still gonna be an amazing older brother. And I think that's amazing. And Choso is awesome. The bottom three are all loosely defined in terms of being a clone. I promise the rest of them are much more just straight up clones. But at number 7, from my favorite video game of all time, we have Cloud Strife. Now, I mean, he's pretty much a clone because he's literally called a Sephiroth clone. He wasn't literally born from Sephiroth's DNA, but he was infused with it and experimented on. And he has that's pretty much his whole story is him being screwed up in the brain hole because of Sephiroth's DNA and experimentation and everything. And he doesn't have as much of that central I'm not even a person kind of angst that usually comes with being a clone, but he still has clone angst because he has his flashbacks. He's sometimes possessed briefly by Sephiroth or Sephiroth's desires, basically. He has this weird programming from time to time, and it's hard for his friends to trust him, and he doesn't trust himself because he has another person's DNA in him, and sometimes it wins out over his own desires. And so, is he straight up just a clone of another person? No, but he very much has that angst of I am not my own person, basically, sometimes. So he still has that. And I don't know the entire story of Final Fantasy VII. I don't know where he goes with this. It was a lot more prominent in Rebirth. He is directly linked with Sephiroth, and it's a really interesting story. We always love it when like the protagonist and the antagonist are like literally directly connected, and that's what Cloud is. He's a Sephiroth clone, and he has Sephiroth's DNA. And I am very interested for the next part of the remake trilogy because I mean, hopefully he'll. I mean, I assume it ends like relatively happily, and he kind of comes to terms with it, and he is able to be like, I do have all this Sephiroth stuff inside me, but I'm still Cloud. I'm not Sephiroth. So hopefully that's how that works out. I don't know though, because the last game was really sad. Maybe it just ends horribly tragically. I don't know. First, people who played the original game, don't spoil it for me. But hopefully his clone angst it goes away and it turns good. Okay, next this is it's like at the top. This is kind of the top of the bottom entry, number 6, because at number 6 we have Twice from My Hero Academia. Now, is Twice oh my gosh, Gene Bubagawara, is he a clone himself? No, that's kind of the whole point. He's the original. The guy in the show is the original Twice. But he absolutely has the required clone angst to make this list, and he perhaps has the like out of all the ones who were like he's not technically a clone, he definitely has the most clone angst regardless, because his whole storyline is honestly just so heartbreaking, and I hate it. It literally, like, I love Hawks as a character, but I like for a time I absolutely despised that man because he kills Twice, and Twice's whole story is about he can make clones, and then he makes too many clones, and then his clones start killing each other, and now he doesn't know if he's the real Twice in the first place. And it was a really amazing storyline, and it's a really interesting thing to explore, and it's very unique to this list because the most of them just have that like general clone angst of like, oh, I don't, trying to be their own person and whatnot. But he just straight up does not know if he is the original person, and that's kind of more interesting than the general clone storyline. But since he's not a technical clone, he had to be a little lower since he's not exactly a clone. But just his whole story, it was almost so wholesome because he finally realized that he is the original, and he had like so much confidence, and even though he was like still a villain and doing bad things with it, it was still like he like figured out that he is the original, that he's not a clone, which is weird for him to be on a top 10 clones list, but whatever. And he gained that confidence, and then he died. So yeah, the clone stories are all usually like tragic, but even him, when he realized that he's not a clone, he's literally the original, he still died. And I'm actually still distraught about it. I'm, holding it in for now because I haven't seen it in a while. I don't plan to go back and rewatch it for a minute because like I pretty much like blank, like my brain was like a blank screen for the next like 3 episodes after he died because I was like, I don't care. I don't care anymore. He just got his entire redemption and everything was going great for him, and then Hawks killed him, and then Hawks was dead to me for a while. But we love Twice. We will always remember Twice with this list and, just the show in general. Okay. Next, we are getting into more of the strictly actual clone category because the next one, I wish more people knew about her. Her name is Gabrielle Kinney, and she is the honey badger. Now, she's the little one right here on this comic. I kind of had to show you an actual visual aid in real life because she hasn't been in, as far as I know, she hasn't been in anything. Like, she hasn't even been animated. Well, she's definitely never been in live action. So I actually have to show you real, like, pictures of her. She is technically a clone, but she's still number 5, so she's a little lower. And that's because her clone angst is not actually that bad, because that's not who she is as a character. Gabby is very sweet, she's very bubbly, and I love her so much. She is one of my favorite Marvel characters of all time. And she's very young, so she doesn't have that much angst with her because that's just not who she is. However, she does have some, like, she's not an angsty person, but she still is a clone, so she has to be traumatized by it. And basically, most Gabby is one of several clones of a clone, and most of her sisters die because they are not stable. Like, a clone is already unstable, a clone of a clone is worse. So most of her sisters die because they are very unstable. And she, like, the whole thing surrounding her and another character that you could never guess who this other character that connected to Gabby is going to be on this list. And so Gabby has to kind of go through, like, over and over again. These new clones are made, and she's very happy. Like, she actually likes when the new clones are made because she's like, new sister sick, and then they die. Always. And her, like, I mean, she's gone through, the Krakoan era of X-Men comics, which were a dumpster fire, so she's probably gone away from that kind of storyline. But that is her central conflict, is that she wants to have these sisters, and she actually acts like it's a very normal kind of family, and she kind of immediately accepts everyone, but her clone angst is basically denial of her clone angst. That's the central conflict of her character, and it's really amazing, and I wish more people knew about her because the comics that she is in are great comics. She deserves more recognition than she gets currently. But she's just a baby, so she doesn't have too much clone angst. The next entry on this list has more. He's pretty much an angsty character overall. So my number 4 entry is Superboy, and this is specifically from the Young Justice iteration of him. One, because I know the comic books version of him is like kind of inconsistent. Sometimes it's closer to the Young Justice version, but sometimes it's completely different. Or the show might just not have been super accurate with it according to the comics. So my version of it is the show because I know way more about him from the show than I do the comics, which is unusual for me. But in the show, that's basically his whole early arc is entirely clone angst because he is a clone made up of the DNA of Superman and Lex Luthor. So yes, Young Justice, Superman and Lex Luthor had a baby. That's not had a never mind. So Superboy is basically he's just angry because he kind of I really like the thing that they do with him because it's the thing where he's a genetically created human, so when he wakes up, he has the emotional control and like social knowledge of a 3-year-old, which is like it makes sense because he's only been aware of the rest of the world for like 6 months. And so he comes out and he's basically just all anger issues. He is mad at the entire world, which is fair because he's a test tube baby, it's traumatic. So he has to go through this whole arc for the first season and a lot of the second season because Lex Luthor is like, I literally low key like created you and now you're like not working with me. And then he's like trying to convince him to be like, hey, you're kind of like my son, so like we should work together. Superboy's kind of like, I don't want to do that. But then he also has this angst of he's also a clone of Superman, one of the greatest superheroes ever, but he only has like half of Superman's abilities. Plus telekinesis in the comics, but he doesn't have that in the show. So he has to deal with both. He's the son of like a supervillain who wants him to go and do bad things with him, but he's also the son of an incredible superhero who he can't, like, he literally is not able to live up to. Luckily for Superboy, he actually does get the time to grow. He doesn't just die or get an unfinished arc. He actually does grow from this. He rejects Lex Luthor, and him and Superman get a really nice relationship. So it's a rare, good clone kind of story. And then he goes on to kind of be a mentor to other superheroes who also have anger issues. No other clones, though. He doesn't mentor any other clones, which is unfortunate because that could be some really great specific mentorship, but he doesn't get it. He just kind of mentors other anger issue men, which is still useful, but he actually gets a kind of a complete clone arc because he goes from being angry about it and hating the world to being a pretty chill dude who just wants to help the younger generation and be like, hey, it does kind of suck to be a superpowered person in general, and I would love to talk to you about that. So yeah, okay. The next entry is, I mean, it might seem silly, but because it's from a kids show technically, but more people need to know about her and recognize how cool of a character she is as well as the rest of these entries on this list. But my number 3, coming in with the bronze medal, is Dani Phantom. Not Danny Phantom, Danielle Phantom. Now, I talked a lot about her. I basically divulged her entire story on my Danny Phantom dedicated episode because that is an amazing show, and if you have not watched it, you should still go watch it. You should still go watch it, even as a non-child, because it's just It's just an incredible show. But basically, Danny she's a clone of the main character. She's literally just a straight up clone, and her whole thing is that she is the unstable clone, like how we had Honey Badger. She was like the basically the one stable clone, and all of her other clones were dying. Danny is the unstable clone, which gives her more clone angst, and she only appears in 2 episodes, which is crazy because she gets a really cool, actually kind of fleshed out story. So she is basically dying immediately because she's completely not stable. It was Vlad's attempt to create a clone of Danny to work for him, and it came out with Danny with an eye, and she's not a fully formed clone. And basically, her story like she almost dies right in front of Danny, which is still crazy for a kids show. But she almost melts, but then she doesn't because something happened. And look, it's children's show logic; it doesn't have to be that deep. But she didn't die, and she gets to go, and she basically goes out and she basically goes out and she's like, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go chill out for a while because that was all very traumatic, and I'm 9 years old. I don't know how old she actually is, but she's like, I'm gonna go chill out for a while, and you know what? That's fine because she's a child and she didn't die. So again, a more positive clone arc, absolutely insane to include in a children's show, and I love it. But yeah, she has clone angst, but on a 9 year old, and that's why it's placed so high because when you do it to a young child, it's more traumatic. So that's it's great for her. Great for her in placement of this list, not probably in life. All right, number two with the silver medal, and honestly, the top two are pretty interchangeable, and the winner was like entirely actually decided by my personal just liking of the character. But my number two entry is again I feel like all of these are just like underrated characters. Ironically, the bottom half is actually like less underrated than the top. But this is from Final Fantasy 15. My number two entry is Prompto Argentum, and he has like so much clone ink. Like it's incredible because I didn't you wouldn't have known he was a clone for the entirety, almost the entirety of the main Final Fantasy 15 game, and you might not know at all if you weren't like paying close attention because they move on from it pretty quick in the original game. He's pretty much like, guys, I'm a clone, and they're like, bet, that's fine, we still love you, homie, and then they kind of move on from it. But if you, like me, played the DLC episode Prompto, you would get the whole story and how he is so messed up from the fact that he's a clone. And he does a bunch of screwed up things, and I talk about it a lot more in my review of Final Fantasy 15, but he has a barcode on his wrist that like marks him as a clone. He tries to burn it off with a flaming stick, and that doesn't go well. He can't do it. It's stuck on there. It doesn't go away. But he finds out that he was literally engineered to not to like stop his friends, to be against his friends. And obviously he doesn't have the initial like thing where he's literally like programmed and he like is compelled to go and hurt them. Like he has pretty much like full control over himself, but he doesn't have and he has a much less human life than his friends. Basically, he like meets his father, who was a crazy wrinkled old man, and he has to kill his father twice. And he like basically spends the entirety of his game just like being traumatized and like not like being very close to crying, but like not doing it because he's more like terrified because he's just finding out all of this weird stuff. So it's an amazing game, honestly. Like specifically episode Prompto is awesome. I actually liked it more than that's crazy. I'm not gonna say I liked it more than the original game. That's crazy. But it's a really great game. And Prompto has guns and he shoots things, so that's really fun. And they don't really do that in the main game. So there's that. But yeah, Prompto has an amazing story, and I think more people should recognize him. I mean, there's two Final Fantasy dudes on this list, and I mean, it's not hard to tell which one is more well known, but Prompto has way more clone angst than Cloud. He has a way better clone story than Cloud, in my humble opinion, but he should be recognized as the clone blonde angsty boy of Final Fantasy, except he's like way less angsty about it, which just adds to it because even though he has all of this trauma, he's still a super happy dude and he just wants to hang out with his friends and he doesn't like burden anybody else. He's not just like, I'm so angsty and sad all the time like some other blonde Final Fantasy dude. He's just like, you know what, my life is really weird and traumatic, but I am gonna be, it's okay, I'm gonna deal with it. And last but certainly not least, actually the opposite of least because she's literally number one on this list, it really could not be anyone other than my girl, X23. Now, I don't know, I'm not gonna say if you've been on this channel for a while that you know how much I love X23. If you know me personally, you probably do know how much I love X23 because, like, I own like 80% of her entire comics like store, like in 80% of like all of the comics she's ever been in. She was the first Marvel character that I bought a comic for. She was the first comic that I ever bought was her, and she holds a special place in my heart. And I also am showing you another live visual aid because I don't want to use gifs of her from the movie because I don't think it adapted her well. That coming from somebody who hasn't seen it, so maybe that makes my opinion slightly less valid, but I don't want to see it because it's rated R and that's stupid anyway. 23, again, she's at the top of this list because I love her, but also she has the clone angst to belong at the top of this list. So basically, she's a clone of Wolverine. So that already gives you the layer of I am a clone of one of the greatest superheroes in our universe. And she doesn't really know that because she, like, I think she's probably the only one on this list, which is crazy because I just realized that she's the only one on this list that I have seen like actually grow up from a child clone all the way to an adult clone because most of them are either like they've been infused with clone DNA or they're like they start not a child, like they're clones, so they are like 16 born. At X-23, she's literally from birth to adulthood. You get to see her entire journey as a clone, and she doesn't escape early like some of these people. She doesn't get like raised by a good family like some of these other clones. She is like raised for several years of her life in the place that cloned her to be exactly what she was supposed to be. A lot of these people really early actually, and they are never really used as what they were cloned to be. So they have the angst of like, oh my gosh, what if I give in to this? But not the angst of I literally was exactly what they wanted to be. But not her. She doesn't get that kind of liberty or what. She straight up was a child assassin for the first, I think, like 12 years of her life. She was just straight up a child assassin and a clone. And then when she got out of that, she didn't even know how to interact with society because all she knew was that she was a clone and that she was supposed to kill people. And so her entire journey is about who am I as like a human being, not a child assassin clone. And it's just her entire like it's so amazing. Such a good story, and it's only further expanded when she actually becomes Wolverine and she has to deal with like I know I'm not him because at that point in her story she's kind of gained a better sense of like oh I'm actually like I'm a separate person, like I'm a real person even though I'm a clone. And she has kind of already gotten to that stage, so like when she becomes Wolverine she has to deal with the fact like okay I know now that I am not him, but people still kind of want me to be him at this stage, but I'm not. And her story is just like all full of that good clone stuff, and she's the best clone. She's the best clone character. Any clone character that wants to be done well, it needs to be like her, and it needs to be like X-23, and it needs to not follow exactly the same formula, because that would just be copying and that would be boring. But it needs to have that like X. It needs to have her decide that she's her own person, and it needs to like go through all of the things that X-23 goes through. I do basically tell her entire story in another episode, which you should go watch because she's amazing, and you should also buy comics with X-23 in it because she's awesome. But yeah, she's the winner of the clones. Those were my top 10, 8 clones. I couldn't think of any more. So if you have other clones that you love from any fandom, because this was completely random, like bunch of different, almost 8 entirely different fandoms. So if you have other clone characters, I would love to know in the comics. Tell me what clones I missed from any fandom you want. And thank you guys so much for watching this pretty weird, random top 8 video. And make sure to subscribe and follow and share it with your friends. And I will see you guys next time. Bye bye.